He could see the moon. People started worshiping the moon because of him. Number one, and they actually have moved. There has not been a one giant piece of ice like they're telling us. It is just the depending on how the Earth axis the moon moving, because it has moved many, many times. In the Dendera zodiac, there's calendar zodiac tells you that the Earth passed through Cancer and Leo back and forth during the time of Thoth or Hermes. It was the King Louis the 16th of France. He said, "I am Jupiter and I am the sun." But also Queen Elizabeth said, "I am the sun and I control the weather." She was saying that, and she had a dress with eyes and ears in her dress. I hear everything and I see everything. So this creepy surveillance state of things is not new. He could see the moon. People started worshiping the moon because of him. And then people started shrinking. But it took a while, actually. So imagine we are traveling through the solar system. And as you know, there's like an order of the moon.
All hail the moon. Is this thing on? Yo. Hey, what up, everybody? Hey, Fire Tribe. It is your boy, homie Romy, here with some good old house cleaning. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on this awesome chat, bringing in some calendar switches, some astrological history, comets in history, asteroids in history, the space news in a vast historical timeline. You gotta love it. It plays an important role. It ties into a lot of the stuff we've been talking about this month and last month, and what we'll always be talking about, the Gnosis. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I would like to invite you to Telegram. We have a group chat on Telegram that is amazing. I love it. It is my favorite. When I find a sweet PDF book from 1385, I can go and automatically turn around and share it with the group chat. You can post videos, photos, all the things. I love it. Also, I want to mention, if you are interested in past life readings, energy healing, energy readings, and things along that clairvoyant nature, a really good friend of mine has been studying in this area for quite some time. I myself have been getting work from her for about 3 to 4 years. Before that, she was also a massage therapist, and I would get incredible body work from her. She's a great friend, and she's actually been on this show before. Her name is Sobaya Sogard. You can go and find her in the Divine Feminine Month, and I have her on a Patreon episode as well. Now, I was doing a session the other day. Actually, it was a multiple mix of sessions. She's setting up these really cool ways to be consistent with the readings, to really pull these things out. And I'm not going to lie, I was skeptic about past life readings and energy and psychic work in general for quite some time, until my first Reiki session. Now, it was such a sensation, to say the very least, the Reiki session that I had for the first time. My skin was tingling underneath like pins and needles for about 15 minutes, and I couldn't stand up. It was insane. And so ever since then, I've been actually looking at these other alternative, series of medicine, or just a deeper type of almost therapy of sorts. I mean, it's really great, honestly. After every session, I feel amazing. Generally, the next day, I'm just straight beaming. And, if there's things going on with you in your circles, with your family, with your home life or your work life, energy itself can attach itself to you. It's so interesting. It's kind of like how a magnet can pick up iron filings and things, or in this conversation, which we talk about, asteroid and comet tails, collecting things as it goes through the cosmos. So as your gravitational field is moving along, it's picking up other energies, subtle energies, things you might not notice are actually almost kind of eating at you. Now, I know that I've been experiencing this, and so when I get work from her, when I'm consistent with it, I feel amazing. So I said, why don't we start shouting you out on the podcast to see if any of the Fire Tribe would be interested in going to you for sessions? Maybe you can give them a discount. And she said, I would love that, Roman. Can we do that? And I said, yes, ma'am. So that's what we are here doing right now. Her website will be in the show notes, and you go and reach out to her, tell her that you're a part of the Fire Tribe, and she will give you discounted sessions. I highly recommend it, at least checking it out if it's something that intrigues you. She is working in this field for a long time, and she is an absolute beauty in this cosmic sense, in this beautiful clairvoyant sense. And sometimes it just helps to talk about the things on another level to somebody who is adept in these fields, you know? So if that's something you guys are interested in, go on over and check her out, Sabaya Sogard at visionswitch.space. Now, if you want to support the boys, Dan and myself, you can go over to the Patreon and subscribe to that and get bonus content. It's $3 a month. If you want to do that, amazing. We love you for that. It's how we get to pay for the RSS hosting and, all these like little tiny fees that come up with the podcasting realm. It's awesome. And so I want to thank all the patrons that we do have. I hope you guys are enjoying the bonus content, and Fire Tribe in general. I hope that you guys are enjoying this content. If there's anybody you want us to talk to, be sure to reach out and let us know. And if you have email addresses, that makes it so much easier. Half the battle is just, looking for who to contact, how to contact them, when to contact them, the timing of everything. It's absolutely all so wonderful. And it is work, but we love the work. Life is about the great work. As the alchemist would say, it is the great work. Life is the journey of the great work, unpeeling one layer at a time. Now, I love you guys very much, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope that this interview inspires you in some way. Now, before we jump to the interview, of course, we're going to have an RFTA News segment with our good friend Adam Stokes. We're diving into the mounds. You guys get the picture. If you listen to this show, which I know you do, which you are doing right now, that you know what we talk about with Adam. The mounds. So get ready, strap in, Adam Stokes for the RFTA News segment, and then we're going to get right into the Tess Clark interview. All right, Fire Tribe. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you over on Telegram. Hey.
Perfecto. Hola, Fire Tribe. Welcome back to
RFTA News.
News you can trust. We're back with Adam Stokes. Adam, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. It's the first week of school here, so I'm switching to a new school. Actually really excited about this job. I'm still a Latin teacher, but just at a new school. Mm-hmm. It's a boarding school, actually, so I'm really excited about it. Really looking forward to it. But the orientation has been basically nonstop. Been a lot of fun. Met a lot of really awesome people. but it has totally sucked my soul this week.
Man, that's rough. Virgo season. It'll do that to you.
Indeed.
So, what do you got for us today, man?
So I have this article. It's kind of old. It's from 2018. It was a book review that I wrote in December of 2018. Now I'm looking at it on a book written by a scholar who is now passed, Mark Lenote. He was actually a mainstream archaeologist, one of the most well-known mainstream archaeologists in dealing with North American history, pre-Columbian North American history. And he wrote a book, Hopewell Ceremonial Landscapes of Ohio. And so I gave a glowing review of this book. But one of the things I really appreciated about Mark Lenote's book is that it kind of goes, even though he's a mainstream scholar, it kind of goes against the trend of mainstream scholars. Basically, I think we talked about this before, mainstream scholars will say when it comes to the mounds in North America that we don't know what their function was. They were just quote unquote ceremonial. And even though Mark Lenote uses the term ceremonial in the title, he really goes into what the function of these might have been, that they served a really deep religious purpose. And he also notes that there were layers of ceremonial practice. So you seem to have one group that did rituals in these mounds, and then another group came along later on and did some new rituals in these mounds. And so I kind of tied this into the Book of Mormon, being a Mormon, and say that basically this might be kind of the twofold usage that Lenote proposes, in his book, might coincide with what we have in the Book of Mormon, where you have the Nephites, the Lamanites, who I identify as the Hopewell and Adena. They kill each other off around the same time that Lenote argues that the usage of the first group that used the site died off. So that's synonymous. And then there's a second group. And so I argue that second group is basically the people of the land, the Native Americans that sometimes intermixed with the Hopewell. They start to use these mound sites. And we see this a lot with Native American mounds, with North American mounds. Not all mounds are the same. So you have a mound site that's really damn old, that's ancient. The original people who built it died off, their culture dies off, and then another culture comes in and uses the mounds. They think of it as a sacred spot. Similar to what you get in the British Isles, with places like Stonehenge. So we know those were made by the Druids and stuff, but people were worshiping there long afterwards. Same with Philosopher's Hill in Heidelberg. Shout out to Heidelberg, which was one of my alma maters, where that was used since ancient times, but it was also used all the way up into modern times, the 1930s, 1940s. Hitler thought it was a really cool place, which is kind of really messed up.
Interesting.
But it was seen as a place of having lots of magic. So that model you can kind of see in Mark Lenote's work.
So we just hopped off talking to a guy that was covering the land Georgia, and Georgia is loaded with mounds, a whole bunch of mounds. Yep. The Etowah mounds are over there, and I'm wondering, does the Hopewell Nation stem down that far? I didn't hear of any relics that way, but who do you concur built the Etowah mounds?
Yeah, I think it's the same group. So what is probably going on there? I don't talk about these that much because I haven't visited them. A lot of the mounds south, the farthest south I've gone with the mounds is Kentucky, but mounds go all the way literally into Mississippi and into Alabama. And Mississippi has some of the most amazing mounds there. And so people ask, are these the same people who made the mounds in Ohio and in Illinois and in Iowa? And yes, what we have here is that basically all of these mounds are built somewhere along the Mississippi River. And so the Hopewell, what are called the Hopewell and Adena, as I argue in my book back here, they come to the New World, they come to North America via the Mississippi River. They go up the Mississippi River, they keep going up it, and it lands into Ohio. And they decide to establish their base as Ohio. But as they're traveling, they basically make these colonies of these mound civilization, which are the mound civilizations that we see now. So same groups of people.
So this is, that's super fascinating because we were talking with Rick Osman during our pre-Columbian.
Oh yeah, he's great.
American month. Amazing, right? And so we were talking about how, people were commuting from down in Mexico or down in South America all the way up into the Ohio River Valley. And it just makes the most sense. It's feasible to enter the mouth of the Mississippi through the Gulf area right there and to use those highways. And it also makes sense why there's massive amounts of mounds all along the Mississippi there. So it's supremely great and lots of threads connecting. Love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's all interconnected.
Do you think the mounds were used as some type of like stash deposit? So like they could like bring goods and stuff and stash them there, and then other people could, make their way to that mound, and then they could grab what they needed and go bring it to wherever else they're from. So that,
that's a damn good question, Dan. So for the most part, I think the mounds, especially the Adena mounds, were for burial purposes or for ritualistic temple purposes. So they have the same configuration as kind of an Israelite temple in the old world. But big but here, we found a hell of a lot of copper in all of these mounds. Tons and tons and tons of copper, not just stuff that was buried with these giants, with these mound builders, but just copper items, tons of copper items that seem to have just been planted there, which leads to possibly another function of these mounds, that they were storage for wealth, for the bling of these mound builders, and they could turn to these mounds, grab that copper, use it for trade, and get more bling. So that's very much a possibility.
Would they have been using that for maybe smithing or something too, like making swords?
I think that's at play as well. Yeah.
Okay. Because what's interesting is it's not just in America that you find them all up and down the Mississippi, like all over the planet or whatever. In all the countries, they all seem to be by riverways or whatnot, even like all the dolmens. And it seems like the dolmens might have a similar function to that. So I always kind of thought like maybe they're a type of like storage lockers where they could just store stuff and then cruise out and go to wherever they wanted,
Yeah. I think that's definitely one of the functions. I think there's a multi-layer, multiple functions, just as with the Egyptian pyramids in Egypt. I think that there's a ton of functions with these Native American mounds. They don't just serve one purpose. Clearly, yes, the mound builders wanted to be buried in them, but they were religious sites where religious rituals took place, where religious texts were preserved, and also where weapons and copper items were preserved as well. So multiple functions for these mounds.
Different mounds for different purposes and such like that.
Yes. And I think, some of the mounds, and I think, Roman, that's a really good point. So some of the mounds, you can tell if the mound's shaped like a freaking serpent, that's a ceremonial, that's a ritualistic mound. But other the mounds that look more like, pyramids,
conical,
like houses, are probably have more of like, as Dan said, a storehouse function.
Beautiful. I have another question. Oh no, go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
I was actually I was listening to a podcast recently, and I heard them talking about like Arabic and it being used in Europe and by the Germans a long time ago, but farther back in history. I know you talk about the Arabic writing a lot in like the pre-Arabic writing or the pre-Hebrew in America. So I was wondering if maybe how far does it actually go? Like, what's the oldest that they have found? And have they found it in these other lands? And is that just because Semitic people went to Europe and Germany, or is it because they also had that writing, or is it through trade, or just a little bit more? Yeah,
that's a great point. I know that in America, in North America, we have, for example, the Los Lunas stone, which has to go back at least before 586 BCE. The earliest Hebrew inscriptions, I know that within biblical archaeology, we would say, trying to think, maybe Tel Dan. No, Tel Dan's kind of late. Kuntilat Ajru in Israel, which has an image of the Israelite God with his girlfriend, with his shorty Asherah,
with his bae.
With his bae, with his girlfriend. That goes back pretty far back. But yes, you're right. There are Hebrew inscriptions elsewhere scattered throughout Europe. And one of the reasons I think that is that you have Israelites and later Jews going westward throughout Europe and basically intermingling with the peoples there on their way to the New World. So you have a lot of biblical traditions and traditions of the Germans, the Irish, etc. One of my friends, Aginas, used to note correctly that the Danish, that word comes from the Danites, who are a tribe of Israel, one of the lost tribes of Israel. So I think that those inscriptions that you find in Germany, in England, in France, come from either Jewish colonies there or Jewish influence on the native inhabitants of those lands.
Can you touch on the Lost Luna stone? You talked about it a little bit in the beginning of that beautiful speech, and that's something that's fascinating. It's a stone in Mexico that has Arabic writing all over it, and it's like lodged in between two other huge stones. Like what?
Yeah, a lot of, and this is the Los Lunas stone has really stood up over time because there were a lot of critics who said that it was a hoax, that the Mormon army came through and wrote it down. But we have traditions from Native Americans that have placed this stone as being there way before the Mormons in the 1820s and the 1810s. So this is a very, very old stone. And the way, I've translated the stone. I've looked at it intensely in detail. Full color scans, full color images. In fact, the librarian at the Los Lunas Library, who is the definitive expert on the Los Lunas stone, I've talked to her several times.
Wow.
She's given me a wealth of information about the Los Lunas stone, and it really holds up. And if you look at it, it's ancient. The writing is ancient. It contains a lot of Hebrew grammar that, in the later development of the language, is removed or shortened as you get in the history of vocabulary. And it's absolutely fascinating. And in my view, one of the best proofs that Hebrews or Israelites were here in North America thousands of years ago.
Wow.
Does it say? When did they change from that longer form to the shorter form? Like what?
Yeah, those are really ancient mistakes. So one of the things I pointed out, and I wrote an article about the Los Lunas stone in Ancient American Magazine, is the word for face. So the face of the Lord, Panei Adonai. So I'll spell that out just consonantally. P, N, and Yod. So P-N-Y, basically.
P-N-Y.
In the Los Lunas stone, we have a extended form of that, which is very, very old. You can read about this in Frank Moore Cross's letters from an epigrapher's handbook. Frank Moore Cross was one of the experts in Hebrew, one of basically the founding fathers of modern biblical Hebrew studies. And he notes that the lengthened form of this is P-H-N-Y. So that's a very old form that you have on the Los Lunas stone. And it's not found in the versions of the Ten Commandments that you have in the Hebrew Bible. So you have the shortened later form of the word for face that in the Hebrew Bible, but you have the longer form in the Los Lunas stone, which suggests that this is something that we're dealing with that's very, very old, because that shift when the H falls out of that word, that happens very, very, very early in the history of the language. So we're talking at least before, I would say, 1000 or 1000 BCE.
Oh,
Wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
You did a whole article on this. Maybe we'll cover that next time, because
we did cover
it's pretty
Roman.
fascinating. We already did the Lost Luminous Stone?
Yeah,
I think
you
we
not here for that?
already did it.
Yeah.
Oh,
don't know
I
if you
think that
was,
was
actually.
one. No, I missed that one. Yeah.
Yeah, we did cover
Unfortunately.
that.
Well, what was the main consensus of what it said?
It's the Ten
what it
Commandments.
said on
It's
it.
the 10 Commandments.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's super fascinating. Yeah,
Could it have been the Phoenicians?
I edited that episode, but I'm gonna go back and check it out. Yeah, I was gonna actually, PHNY. It was one that kind of Phoenicians came to my head. What about the Phoenicians?
Even too. Yeah.
It's all connected. The languages are all connected. Just like the mountains.
Okay.
Because the Phoenicians were traders, right? So they were like mercantile. They're the merchant class. So if they were like going all over the place, bringing goods from different places everywhere,
Well, we
they have been
Phoenician
using that
coin.
language as kind of like the merchant language.
Well, Phoenician is very similar to Phoenician is one of my favorite languages because it's directly connected to two of my other favorite languages. Phoenician is very similar to Hebrew. It's also very similar to Latin. And in fact, I don't really like this guy, but Saint Augustine, he was a Christian theologian. I think he was kind of a douche, honestly.
Of Hippo? Yeah, he was very controversial.
Yeah, I don't like him for a variety of reasons. Anyway, he used a form of Phoenician known as Punic, which is basically the Hebrew grammar written in the Latin alphabet. So we have a bunch of Punic inscriptions all over the Roman Empire that are written in Latin script. So, you guys still there?
Yeah, you're good.
All right. So we have a bunch of Punic inscriptions written in Latin script. So Phoenician is kind of the best of both worlds, Latin and Hebrew.
Interesting.
Our buddy Chance says that the Phoenicians never existed and that they're phony.
Oh gosh,
Phony.
No, we have them we have them all over the place. They're very well attested to.
Okay.
The Romans tried to wipe them out, and they did. They almost succeeded in wiping them out, but we still have so much of the culture. Even in Roman literature, with the Aeneid, for example, you have Dido, who's the queen of the Phoenicians. So they're all over the place.
Mm-hmm. You can get rid of the Phoenician.
Is that like an equivalent to Diane or?
Dido? No. Dido is because you have Diana in the Aeneid, but Dido's just this. She's this Carthaginian princess who falls in love with Aeneas. But then the gods say, Aeneas, you got to go on. So he breaks up with her. And it's so heartbreaking that she burns herself on a funeral pyre.
True love.
Yeah, true
like
love.
a Romeo and Juliet.
There's a whole opera about it that's actually pretty good.
Oh, really?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Dido and Aeneas.
Dido and Aeneas. So back to this book though. This author has passed. What was some of his other works? Did he have any other notable works that you enjoyed?
He did a lot on, this was his main work, but he did a lot of articles and stuff on pre-Columbian American history, and very widely respected. One of those people, everybody in the field, I know I'm kind of on the fringe. I'm proudly on the fringe, very proudly on the fringe, but
Nice.
even the fringe and the mainstream respected this guy, and his work was really, really good.
Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check them out. Maybe get a copy of that and check it out. There's so much to the pre-Columbian stories, and there's so much to cover. Like the underground connections. That's kind of something I want to find. I was going to ask you about some of these markings on the sides of the mounds, or these entrances to caves having like denotions from like big arrow marks either on certain mountains or things like that.
Yeah.
Is there any up by you where you're at? Are there any cave I don't know the right word for it, relief or inscriptions that are on the sides of mountains or mounds.
Not in the mounds near me, but I know some mounds do contain inscriptions. Inscriptions were found inside of them. Some of the Georgia mounds that Dan was talking about, inside of them, they're really cool because you'll think it's like just a hill. It's just like a hill, but inside, very intricate. Basically, there's an open space where things were put. So really fascinating. It depends on the mound.
Wow, that's super cool. We were also talking about Stone Mountain earlier too, which is another place in Georgia that's like a huge, supposedly like not hollow, but it goes like all the way down to the bedrock, like 7 miles into the ground of pure
There's some
quartz.
mounds like that. I mentioned last week when I went to the Butte Mound, I believe, in Wisconsin. And I took a picture. I'll send it to you. But the whole thing looked like a freaking mountain, but it was a mound. And really, really impressive.
Do you think all mountains are mounds?
I think a hell of a lot more than we think. Yeah.
I was driving home today and I seen a mountain to my left, and when I was driving my car, and I was just staring at it, trying to drive too, But I was like, man, that sure does have a nice looking pyramid shape to it.
I think that's a lot. I think that's the case for a lot of these mountains, not only in here, but all over the world. Russia and China have their own pyramids, and people just call them mountains. It's not a mountain. It's not a pyramid. It's just a mountain, but it's a pyramid.
When they're covered with grass, like these ones that are Chinese pyramids that you're talking about. They're just covered in grass and trees, and unless you were told it was a pyramid, you wouldn't know because it's literally covered in foliage. So I guess it's really about something else too. I was digging into earlier is just the I'm gonna butcher the word spelunking. Spelunking. So, there was like this rush and this time period in American history where there was so much resources to be had and to be claimed ownership on or what have you, but it was to the adventurous to go get it. And there was a rise in spelunkering at a certain time, and but what I'm getting at is like it's like we only know about the mounds that are there, we're being told about, and that have been excavated and looked at. But it's just really, how adventurous are we really being to go check out and see what it is, and then what actions can we take to maybe say, can we look at this further? You have to go get federal funding or some sort of local funding and LiDAR scans and things like that.
It's interesting.
Is there any works? Yes.
My friend, going to the question I think you're about to ask, my friend, Dr. Greg Little, in his book, Encyclopedia of Native American Mounds and Earthworks, he'll show what a mound looked like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and it's overgrown with trees and stuff like that. And people have uncovered it and realized it wasn't natural. It was man-made. These are man-made. So I think that's the case with a lot of these hills and mounds all over the world.
Yes, and is there any new projects that are coming out that you've heard of, like about doing LiDAR scans here in America to find more things like that?
Well, one of my friends, guy I write articles for in Ancient American Magazine, Wayne May, he is doing ground penetrating radar and LiDAR for a temple site that we found in Fort Madison, Iowa. So I know he's doing some work on that. I'm not sure if anybody else has done that, but we actually had a LiDAR specialist from Russia, a wonderful lady. Gayovko, I believe, is her last name, but wonderful lady, one of the nicest people I've ever met, who does this ground penetrating radar. Is professional and really, really darn good at finding stuff.
Awesome. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
How much is a LiDAR machine?
A crap load of money. More money you gotta get. Yeah.
They get more Patreon
And you
subscribers.
know what?
For that.
Here's the funky thing. They charge like for a section. So just like to do a little plot might be like $20,000. If you want to do a whole thing, I mean, you're talking about at least, throwing down $500,000 or something like that. It's very expensive technology.
Wow.
Very expensive technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, this mountain that I drove by, there seemed to be like in the middle of it, like some type of crevice that looked like a cave opening. And I was like, I want to go over there.
Spelunking.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to kind of my tradition because I have to bring in Mormonism into everything. But there was in the Mormon tradition, there is a tradition that the Hill Cumorah, where Joseph Smith found the golden plates, that there was an opening in that hill, and inside of that opening were a bunch of artifacts, ancient text, ancient materials, and the like. So who knows what these mountains may have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, dude, I've heard many stories. I heard a story the other day from a friend who came to visit, talking about a guy up in Redding, California, that I'm not joking, everybody, legitimately went, he was cross country, or he was out of the country, but him and his friends went to Thailand for like surfing or something, and they stumbled upon a bunch of American gold while out of the States. And they stumbled upon a literal like chest or a bag full of gold bars just by being adventurous and going out and about. And then they they did the right thing and they like brought it to the embassy, but they ended up actually winning it and keeping all the gold there. And so totally absolutely possible. And I highly recommend like going out. Like Adam, you travel all over the place, man. You're getting out there, you're going checking all these places. Let me ask you this, there's obviously some giant lore within the Mormonism, viewpoints. How tall supposedly was Joseph Smith? Was he a giant?
No, he was pretty tall though. He was like over 6 feet. He was higher than most of the people during his time period.
Okay, nice. Yeah, just thought I would ask. I don't know if he was like a part of the ancient bloodline or anything like that. Maybe
he claimed to be part of the ancient bloodline. Yes. So he claimed to be part of the ancient Israelite bloodline. So, so go figure.
Cool.
Cool, man.
Sweet. All right. Well, this has been a great intro episode, everybody. You guys are stoked. Always extra double scoop when we got Adam on.
Yeah. Man.
Well, my pleasure. I'll try and find something good for next week as well.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Anywhere people can go check you out or anything like that, man?
Instagram I have, and my Latin tutoring website. I've been trying to like update it, but I put a bunch of ancient history stuff on there as well. I even have one of my lectures I gave at the Phoenician Museum a couple weeks back. So Lingua Classica is connected to Facebook, and you can see some of my lectures on there.
Excellent. Have you been on any podcasts lately or done anything like that recently?
No, I was on, let me see. Debbie Gets Red Pilled, but that was about a couple weeks back. That was, it was about like 3 or 4 weeks ago.
All right.
So, like I said, this new job has sucked my soul.
Well, we're lucky to have you, man.
Excellent.
Hope you get some good rest coming up here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you. My pleasure. We appreciate you around here, Adam, and so do all the listeners. So thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing with us everything that you know and what you found, because you know a lot and it's great. And we look forward to seeing you again. So we'll see you next week. And thanks for being a part of this, man.
Sounds good. My pleasure. Have a great week.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
What's up? Are y'all ready to party? Are y'all ready to break it down and go on to the next side? Because after this interview, you're going to be 2 hours smarter. 2 hours smarter. Don't forget, join us on Telegram. Love you.
Hello, Fire Tribe. Welcome to
Rising.
From the Ashes. I'm Daddy Knocky Dan.
I'm the homie Romy. Hello, sir. How you doing?
Fantastic.
Nice.
Can't complain. How are you doing, sir?
Also doing fantastic. I just want to share. I know I always start with some terrible weather things because it's just what I deal with while I'm working outside, but it is fantastic here in California. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. It's like the springtime. It is beautiful. And when you go outside at, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, the birds are singing, and it's just absolutely fantastic. But it's also fantastic because today we are going to dive deep into so many interesting things that's going to tie a lot of threads together for this month and every month, because we're talking about cosmologies, cosmogonies, mythos, ancient connections to all of the cultures, and we love it. And we have a great guest today.
Yes, we do. Today with us from, from Mythos Decoded,
Mythos Decoded.
Tess Clark. And to give you a little background, I'm going to read from her website. It says, within the last 200 years, there's been an effort to discredit ancient historians, world mythologies, and sacred texts. The internet is filled with information containing truths mixed with misdirection, confusing the readers. It takes discernment, research, and thinking to try to find your truth. Because mythologies and sacred texts are encoded historic events, their meaning has been distorted by philosophers, historians, scientists, and by some members of mystery schools who promote their tribe or ancestors, fueling the divide and conquer and right versus left paradigm. Beautiful. It also goes on to say the meaning of a myth. The original meaning of the Greek word mythos was speech, story, discourse, discussion of a subject, a saga, a long detailed report or tale, report of events. And 1840, its meaning was arbitrarily changed to untrue story, rumor, imaginary, or fictitious object or individual. The epics of creation and myths were encoded detailed stories used to reenact past planetary catastrophes during the lifetime of rulers, and were performed during annual festivals and used a form of propaganda to assert the power of the ruling tribes and to remind the people they should be obedient, faithful servants to their kings, or punishment in form of catastrophes would befall them. And I like how she highlighted astro and catastrophes. That was pretty cool. It actually made me think of cats. Tess, is there anything to cats being personified and connecting to catastrophes?
Well, the word is astro, from aster. That's the root.
Yeah.
That you can find in all of those. So I don't think cat has that aster. But you know that in Egypt they were worshipped because they probably represented, all animals have represented and are still representing the bloodline. So you can see from unicorns, hogs, wolves, dogs, lions, eagles, double-headed eagles, all the animals, basically, even dogs have represented. And of course, all the Egyptians, they all have their animal heads, but that didn't mean that they were half animal and half humans. It was just their symbol.
Shapeshift. Usually, like the cat, though, there was Sekhmet, I believe, and she was a female lioness who was like the goddess of war. So it seems like some type of destruction there, and the feminine energy. So I was wondering, maybe
you're
like
talking about Inanna,
astro cat, and like an astro cat would have some type of cataclysmic, astrology type something come along with it, maybe.
You're going to have to work on that one for a little bit, bud. Won't
making
come
some
back
speculation.
that one's a little bit further down the rabbit hole. That's beautiful. Well, there is something with the spiders on Weaving Spiders Welcome. They have this like inside joke about there's like an old cats are highly worshipped in a lot of ways, and I think there is definitely something to the cats. But that might not be Tess's rabbit hole. But
well, actually, yes. Actually, can I say something about the cats?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. So, well, I think what he's talking about is Inanna, the version, Inanna. My theory is that all of the pantheons around the planet are the same people, and they were a big family. And then they spread out, they divided the planet, and they said, we own it, including everything on it. And that's why they treat us the way they treat us, and they think they're different. And one interesting thing is that, so they have different names, of course, and they have different families. So they do have different stories, and they do change the way they tell their stories because they want to be original, or they mixed with some other people that were in the area, so they wanted to blend in or whatever, or just kind of like hybridize the stories. But one thing interesting about the cats and the Rh negative, because I am Rh negative, and I know that we are super vulnerable to toxoplasma, and toxoplasma or toxoplasmosis is something that cats carry. Also dogs can have that. Yeah, and that goes to your brain. It goes to your brain, and it makes you really reckless, and it makes you very do things that are very risky and that you wouldn't do otherwise. And it's really interesting.
Yeah. Can I ask you about, now that we haven't talked about Rh negative blood in quite some time on the show, but it is really interesting because, just speaking of people's genetic line, right? Like how genetics get passed down can point to a lot of, a lot of trails of history, right? If you follow the bloodline, right? And, you hear often about like these wars between bloodlines or families and bloodlines. Well, you do some really ancient historical work. And so I'm wondering if you can maybe tell us about your version or understanding of the bloodlines themselves and where they split off, and maybe some like ongoing war that has happened, and maybe using things like cats and toxoplasmosis to have that be like a weapon or something like that. Is because there seems to be like with modern things going on, like some people talk about in conspiratorial circles, like hunting down the Rh negative blood to see how many are left and to kind of decode the population like that. I'm wondering what your opinion is on that, and what you found in your research and associating with the bloodlines.
Well, that's really, really fascinating subject, and one that I've really dwelt and went deep into. And you can find this explained in detail in the last 2 chapters of my book, Mythos and Cosmogony. So just take your time and read through, because I do talk about the family trees and who represents who, or what the names are, the equivalents, as best as I could. And I have to start by saying that these people supplanted each other, well, especially Marduk, as you know already. He supplanted Enlil and Ninurta, and actually everyone. He was like the dictator. So around the time of Hammurabi, that's when he came to rule with the laws of Babylon. And so then he became to represent what Ninurta, which is the planet Jupiter, was being represented before by the ruler. And because they always had a human ruler, well, I call it human, but he's like a human type ruler. So they were walking the earth. And then they had the planet, depending on the planet that we were closest to or orbiting, and it was causing catastrophes on Earth because there was electrical interactions and also elements and just a lot of catastrophes happening on the planet. That's why they said, I am this planet. So the people would just be totally petrified scared and believed that these people were omnipotent, omnipresent, just like what the monotheistic God became to be. So people were just totally subservient and obeying these gods, human gods. But going back to the other question, so then sometimes you just have to. It gets kind of confusing nowadays when you see somebody, for example, worshiping Saturn, the black stone, or anything that has the name Blackstone, or the big bull of Wall Street, or all these symbols that you see. Even Tesla. Look at Tesla's. I was just looking at his logo, and it's a ram. I think it's a ram. It's a T. He made it into the horns. And it's either a bull or a ram, but then you can just look a little bit further back, and then you'll figure it out who he's. I think it's a bull, actually, because of who he's supporting. And so you've got right now the world state right on the left paradigm, basically, and they're fighting. But and then you can tell one would be the dragon lineage, and the other one the bull. Or the dragon would be also the serpent, and the reptilians. We can talk about that later. I'll give you my version of what it is to according to what I have found. But going back to the bloodlines, so you can look at that very detailed lines, and where does it go, and where did it go, where it started. So the idea is like the blue-eye gene just suddenly showed up between 5 and 10,000 years ago. So they give you that range. So it's not too long ago, only between 5,000 years ago. That's pretty early. And it matches actually the lineages of Adam and Eve. And when these people arrived, according to the Sumerians, if you count I use a new chronology, but using the ancient chronology. So people have not paid attention to that. I'll go back to that. So that's why I said it could be a shorter time than what we are thinking of. But the Black Sea, in the Black Sea or around the Black Sea, this blue-eyed gene called the OCA2 appeared suddenly. And we know that all of the gods were shown with blue eyes.
Is that OCA2?
Mm-hmm. OCA2. You can look it up. It's called the blue-eyed gene. So that's when it appeared. So then, they say it was a mutation. Of course, that's what the scientists say, because they're not going to tell you it was probably aliens, or they're not going to say that. So then that should make you think, okay, well, that's interesting. Now, the Rh negative, they also say it appeared very long ago, but I don't think so. I don't think that it's that long ago. But it could be what the Neanderthals and the Denisovan people, that's what they're called. And there's this woman who is a priestess, Tautia, or can't remember her name, and she's from England, and she tells you she's so negative, and the bloodline is what people used to call the Neanderthals, but the Neanderthals are not they're not what they are telling us that they were. They didn't look the way they tell us that they look. They look more like us. Big, but they were also she has a kind of like a strange theory, which I don't completely agree with, but she says that the Cro-Magnon were the thin, tall people, but she also says they were the enemies. And then but she kind of like talks about the Enki and Enlil lines, kind of, but then she does this weird thing with the one would be the Neanderthals, and the other would be like the thin, skinny, tall people, and the Neanderthals would be stronger, stockier, shorter. That's what she says. But what I had found, besides that, there's a lot of stories, like the people from the Basque people and the Catalonians know in their history that the grandson, would be Noah. Yeah, it'd be the grandson of Noah, who is so Noah had 3 sons. Japheth, Shem would be the oldest, or the eldest, or the firstborn. Japheth would be the youngest. Shem is the first, then Ham is the middle one, and Japheth is the third one. And then the Basque know that he went after the flood about 128 years. That's what they say. 128 years after Noah's flood, he went to Tarragona, which is in the Iberic Peninsula, and founded that city. And they could have been there before, but he returned, and then he was mining it and all of that. And Tubal-Cain is, the son of Japhet, Tubal-Cain or Tubal-Cain. And so they know that just like that. It's like they don't even think about it like, oh, it's all made up or it's just all fantasy. And I think that's one of the dangers of people that say all the books are a lie, because there is so much good information in these ancient books that if you just discard all of them, it's like they're robbing us from the dots that we can put together ourselves, because we're not part of a secret society.
Yeah, there's certain symbols that are like, and it takes a while. I mean, you know, granted that, you know, you can have an awakening moment or epiphanical moment, you know, overnight, but a lot of symbols take rereading and time and a lot of research to start seeing them. But you're absolutely right. It's fascinating. And what else is fascinating too is the body shape and type that kind of goes down through these, you know, through the genealogies of ancestors through time, because there's very clearly difference in the genealogical physical attributes of humans. And, you know, obviously we're at a point now where we have a lot of, you know, everybody's kind of mixed with a little bit of short, little bit of tall, a little bit of stout, a little bit of long, that kind of thing. But when you really trace it back, you know, there was definitely way bigger people, bigger. And I'm wondering where along the line do you see in your historical research that we got shorter? Where and when did that happen? The switch, was it just over time through evolution of just interbreeding,
Hybriding?
Yeah, hybridizing humans, or do you think it might have been intentional? What's up with the changing of the body structures and the heights of people?
Yeah, this is a really great question to ponder and try to figure out what happened. And actually, I was thinking, I think you asked me about the DNA. So before answering this one, I just wanted to say that yes, they do. Well, they spread themselves through. They had harems. You know, they had as many wives they could have, the males, and then they would try to have the Y. Well, there's the Y chromosome, which is carried or passed from male to son only, and the mtDNA passes from mother to daughter. And that's why these people would intermarry, and they would marry their sisters, and mothers would have sex with their sons or fathers with their daughter. It's really sick, but that's what they would do to keep that mtDNA and that Y chromosome in the family. But then when there was time of catastrophes, they also wanted to have as many children as possible, so they would survive on the other side of the catastrophes and they would continue to rule. But then because of that, then their bloodlines got sort of spread out, and that's why there are some of us, like I'm not pure royalty, but I do have that the negative blood that was because of of their spreading out and hybridizing. And then obviously they target each other, and they had these laws to stay within tribes, not because they were racist per se. Of course, they're, you could say racist or not, but it's because they wanted to keep this Y chromosome and mtDNAs in one family, and kind of, it's just because that's what they were told that was important, and they were making pacts or some kind of agreements with these lineages of their ancestors. So they would sacrifice themselves, basically. That's why they would marry people that they didn't want to marry, but of course then they had their lovers and their other life, so it didn't really matter, but it was like agreements. And of course, people giving their DNA now, and all these diseases that sometimes are targeting certain people. It could be a combination of natural natural diseases, because we all have different antigens, which means that our body can produce different antibodies, basically, to different diseases. And in historic times, some people would die, some groups of people, either races by race or by age, or animals would get affected by certain diseases coming from the tails of comets or during the time of the approaches of big planets. And so that's quite interesting. But then going back to, and then green eyes, blonde, red hair is all from these people as well. That's the kind of the theory and what it shows in the, if you look at all the ancient paintings of the gods, they were mostly blonde, red-headed, or dark burgundy, color on the hair, and green eyes or blue-eyed. And then going back to the other, the shrinking. So this is kind of complicated if you don't know anything about the history of the solar system. So I'll try to, and I'll be really quick because I made it really long in my last interview, and I was like, darn it, I should have just made it really short. Okay, so I'm going to say it really short. So the idea is that the Sun and Jupiter were a binary star system, and the Earth was possibly orbiting Uranus or one of the other gas giants now in the solar system, which include Neptune, Saturn, or Uranus. And they were coming into the solar system. They were captured by the Sun and Jupiter, and then they started going nova. And then, as it happens with capture of rogue planets entering the solar system seen as comets, then Earth started behaving like a comet, and also Venus, Mars, and Mercury, which are now called the inner solar system planets. When they were going past Saturn, that's when Noah's flood happened, and the plasma sheath of these red dwarfs, because they were not stars like our sun, they were red or brown dwarf stars. That's what was called the time of the Garden of Eden, the time of the Shekinah, that Adam used to bask and his family used to bask under, and people wouldn't get sick, and everyone was giant, and there was dinosaurs or really, really big, gigantic life, including humans. All humans were giant, and these people could have been even taller. So that's what it sounds like, that they were even taller. And then with the catastrophes coming into the solar system, the brown dwarfs went into a kind of nova state, which means they were flaring because there was too much electricity that they were interacting with. I also studied the electric universe and the plasma universe, and then all these catastrophes made the atmosphere changed, and that was the purple dawn also, or the time of what would you call it, the golden age. So then the plasma sheath goes away. There's no more infrared light, which before kept us in a much healthier state and growing. If you put, actually now people that grow plants and cannabis use red lights, red infrared, and you can also use other lights, but these ones make the plants grow very fast because of the same reason. There's just very healing, and it just kind of makes things grow. And so when we came out from this sheath, we could see the stars for the first time. That's when Adam he saw night for the first time in the text, and he was afraid. He could see the moon. People started worshiping the moon because of him. And then people started shrinking, but it took a while, actually. So imagine like I said, we are traveling through the solar system, and as you know, there's like an order of planets. So first, if we were in Uranus, then we came to be close to Saturn, and they were all flaring, by the way, at the same time, or very close to one another. And then we passed by Jupiter. We were temporarily captured by Jupiter. And the Pythagoreans show two models. Well, one model where we were tidally locked to Jupiter, which is really interesting, around 500 BC. Pythagoras showed the Earth like the comet, and that's the geocentric solar model. And then the next Pythagorean astronomer called Philolaus shows the Earth orbiting Jupiter. And that's the time of Marduk and the thunderbolts of Thor and the trident of Poseidon. And in the rabbinical sources, it says that, and I suggest people read them because they are like so incredibly full of information. Genesis has like 1% of what you can read in it's called The Legends of the Jews by Ginsberg. And you can find all of these in my links in my PDF. All of the sources are there. And in there, it says that up until that time, the fathers and the sons, the mothers and the daughters couldn't be differentiated. You wouldn't know which one was which because they wouldn't age. People wouldn't age. But at that time, people lost the ability to stop aging, so people started aging. So that was around the time of Abraham and his son. Well, I can't remember his name right now. It's not Isaac or whatever. But that's the time of Abraham. That's when the Jupiter events happened. But it was like ongoing since like I said. So first Uranus, then Saturn, and then Jupiter. And also they started shrinking in size. But what happened as well on the planet that is described in the text is that there was so much less oxygen in the atmosphere. So the Earth lost a lot of oxygen, and the atmosphere changed, the conditions changed, and people's eyes used to be larger. So if you pay attention to the old Sumerian statuettes, you see all these big giant eyes, and we're like, why are the eyes so big? And that's why people still like big eyes. That's why the big eyes is such a big deal. And women are always making their eyes look like ridiculously large. It's because it comes from this era, and these people probably had larger eyes, and the eyes were bigger and larger because it was darker. We didn't have such a strong light and harsh environment like we do now. It's really hard for our body. And the body of people changed. The skin used to be, they called it horny. So it was like, I guess like a kind of tough, and I don't know what that means, but it was different.
I'm wondering about I'm lacking a really good word for this, but like the clairvoyant properties of these people, or what do you believe?
Telepathic.
Yeah, like just the powers and the abilities that living under the other sun, the original Saturnian sun during this time, and if they can go into like explaining some of how the pyramids were built, because we know now that we do have small magnetite clusters in our brain, which help us with so much of consciousness and the magnetism of Earth and the magnets in our brain, corresponding together, obviously. But I'm wondering what the difference was with the amount of plasma coming through, the different size of bodies. Giants must have had more magnetism or magnetite clusters like in their brain potentially, or if like the bigger eyes helped with some sort of like special abilities that we might be lacking now, like some sort of psychic abilities or telekinesis, potential use of other metals and like metallurgy and crystals and things like that.
Yeah, well, what I know about this is that when we were in the infrared light of the red or brown dwarf stars, which could have been including Saturn, Uranus, and Jupiter also for a little while, is that probably because we could see, so the eyes could see a different wavelengths that we don't see anymore. For example, right now they have the Lucifer infrared telescopes looking for brown dwarfs and comets and planets that are shrouded in this darkness. So the only way to see them is with an infrared telescope. So I imagine that because we were in that type of light, and that we could perceive the aura of people and animals. So that was a way of communicating. Now, what I know is that during the time of Adam, it says that he invented 70 languages. So by the time of Adam, which he lived for a little while, maybe, I don't know, decades or maybe hundreds of years in this state of the infrared, under the infrared light, they were still using languages. So that tells you that they were not totally telepathic. And that during the time of Thoth, which is Hermes, which could have been around the same time, they say that he perfected languages. Diodorus Siculus talks about him in length, and created music.
What does it mean to perfect a language? Like, what does that mean to you? Because what is a perfected language?
Well, you can make it more complicated. Maybe there were less words that people use. See, the other thing that is really important to understand is that people were, before they got rounded up into cities and made, civilized, which is what we do now. So everything we do, it's very similar. Everything that we do basically comes from these people, and it's not that old. So everything, the good and the bad, it's from them, like makeup, everything, metallurgy, the cities, prostitution, everything. So before, people were just living by themselves, then they called them savages. They were just minding their own business. So we don't know what kind of language they had. Maybe it's just like when you go to the forest now, to the rainforest, or you find some natives living here and there, they have their own language, right? So then they have to be taught these other language so they could be understood and follow orders, basically. So I imagine that's what that refers to. And Diodorus also says that Osiris went with an army around the world, left Thoth in charge to help Isis, his wife, and his sister, while he went with an army around the world. Well, he went to different places, not all over the world, and he conquered these places, and he rounded up people and, just make them kind of like just enslave them. And technologies, yes. Well, they were asking about the technologies. They must have had gravity. Should have been, if there is such a thing as gravity, because some people say that gravity is just a very weak electromagnetism, which makes sense. It's like a magnet, and you were talking about that. So then that would mean that you could lift things easier, and that's why they have these megalithic, gigantic blocks. And the ones in Russia, in Goraya Chornia, I think that's the name, they're even larger than the ones that you can find in Baalbek and the ones that you can find in Bolivia, in Tiwanaku, or yes, those giant ones. They're even larger. They look like mountains, some of these places, and they're man-made, or they've been like moved by mankind, because they definitely have perfectly rectangular cuts. Some of them can be natural, yes, but so there was something that these people, probably because of the whole, if we were not where we are now.
Who was the character? Was it Dolph? Did you say
Thoth?
Oh, Thoth. Okay.
Yeah, Thoth. Yes, Hermes.
I heard Dolph.
Is that the one we were talking about? Yes. He's the one also that went around and was building all the stone calendars. And they were calendars in order to be able to tell time and the entrance of the equinoxes. And they use the Sothic cycle, which is the heliacal rising of Sirius. Well, because these would be because probably we're connected to the same plasma filament, and so it doesn't move. It kind of follows Earth, and that's why they were using it, just like the Pleiades. So that means that we are also connected to the Pleiades along the same plasma filament, and that's why they were used to navigate. But there was, yes, I mean, we just don't know for sure because we don't see it. There's some theories of people talking about giant lenses and melting the stone and then creating sort of like concrete, what we do as concrete. So that's another way that they could have built many things. But because we see partially cut out of the bedrock, some of these blocks, then they were definitely cutting them because they are like partially cut. So how can anyone say no, it wasn't cut? So
yeah, that's the thing a lot of people kind of overlook when you're talking about building of the pyramids is these stones are huge and they're big. Yes. And how did they move them? But wait, hold on. Let's go back a little bit. How did they make them? Let's look at the constituents and exactly what type of material they were using. Is it cut or is it poured into a frame? And if that's the case, you're building it step by step, you wouldn't even need to move them. You could build them all in one succession as you pour the layers on. That's one thing. But if you're mixing cement and you have the ability to make small particulates of the rock, well, you said making lenses to melt things. That the finding and the discovery of like volcanic glass around Egypt is very prominent. There's a lot of ancient volcanic glass around there. So, yeah, in the desert, right? And so that's really interesting point. Like I hadn't even thought about big like projection lasers through lenses, ancient lenses. We know about the potential of that. The Egyptian light bulb.
Yes, definitely. Well, what I know is that you have to compare everything to what we do now. And what is it that we do? I think we do all kinds of things, right? So we do carve. Yeah. So basically, it's what we do, just take it back. And they might have different technologies because, again, there was way much electricity in the atmosphere. Way more, so it was easier maybe for them to do all this. So yes, they were machines, they had high tech, they were carving, they were pouring, they were doing laser, you've seen the amazing Hindu buildings that you can make music, or you can, well, if you hit the wall, it's hollow, and then it's all intricate shapes, and you're like, how did they do that? And you can like pass a hair through the back of it. So they were doing all kinds of technologies and all kinds of things and experiments. But also remember that there was a lot of electrical discharges, which are like giant thunderbolts that were coming into the planet and from the planet. So the Earth was also doing like arcs of bolts from one to another, just like anodes and cathodes, which is the circuitry of Earth, supposed to be the same as the sun and all the other planets and Jupiter. So that was totally like burning, melting, turning things into, sun into glass. It had radiation. Every time there is a connection to a planet, and possibly now, they're talking about, I wanted to mention this because a friend mentioned it. She's really worried. She's in Europe, and they're talking about the nuclear reactor in Ukraine, that it might get, blown up, and it's almost at the brink of disaster. And if it gets blown up, then all of Europe is going to be filled with radiation. And so I was telling her, well, it's really interesting they're talking about this now, because it could be two things. that we are connecting to the tails of maybe K2 or Mars, because we also connect to planets. And if those planets are interacting with another comet, then it's like triple electricity and electrical connection. And that's what the ancients called the yugas, or Nibiru. Nibiru means crossing of electrical currents of Earth with other planets. So that's what I found about Nibiru. It could mean Jupiter, Mars. Well, they actually, it's not me saying it. The Chaldeans are saying this, that it was referred to as these planets. And so you can see it in my book. You can just do a browse for the word Nibiru or Nibiru, and you'll see it there. But so what's going on is that all these thunderbolts have radiation, and they also do or cause mutations called the Ebner effect. And this is done in the laboratory, where you put an electrical current, for example, to larvae or different things that are alive, and they will mutate. They will become something else, or they will change to a different type of animal or creature, or they will just mutate and get messed up, or just change. So with all these electrical interactions, all life on the planet was changing and mutating, and that's why probably you have the giants with 6 fingers and 2 rows of teeth, or I don't know about the elongated skulls. That seems to have been coming from another planet, because not everyone had this situation. If everyone just changed suddenly, maybe you could say, yes, it was a mutation that happened to the whole planet, but it didn't. It only happened to a certain group of people, so that's very strange. And Velikovsky, actually, he talked about the elongated skulls, which are called dolichocephalic people, and he said that they were the Semites, the descendants from Shem, which is very strange. And then he talks about the people that didn't have this, and he talks about this in his books on the unpublished work in thearchive.org. I think it's the peoples of the sea or something like that. So yeah, he even talked about it. So it's quite interesting.
That is interesting. Earlier you said Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Isn't Shem the middle child? I thought that's why he was that's the line that rules or is supposed to take over society, or how
the firstborn is always that's how it's not, I'm saying that it's the most important because it's silly, but that's the way that they have followed their laws of who becomes the king or the ruler. It's son. Well, the priority was the father that married his half-sister or his sister because of the mtDNA that I was mentioning, and then the firstborn. And that's why the whole fighting between Enki and Enlil, or Ea and Elil, started because Enki was the firstborn, but Elil was born to the same father, but to the half-sister of the father, where Enki, his mom, wasn't the sister, so the mtDNA wasn't there, you see? So that's why the whole thing, and it just has been the exact same thing with their children. It has not changed. And then they have that's what happened with, the guy that sold the blessing. The blessing in the story, which is the one you're talking about, well, that's the sons of, Abraham? I mean, I haven't read this in a while, but it's all in there. Allegedly, the blessing, it's all the knowledge. As far as I know, that's what they call the blessing in the rabbinical sources or the Hebrew Bible. It just was all the knowledge, and he gave it to his brother in exchange for a bowl of lentils. Do you remember this story from the Testament, which sounds really silly? What happened is that, yes, thank you, exactly. So there was catastrophes, there was famine, and that's why he exchanged he was probably half dead, just half dead. And then he said, sure, just take it. I'll give it to you. Just don't help me. Don't let me die. And that's what happened. And then they always were angry at each other. It's like, how dare you? How could you do that? And they always fight. They've always been killing each other. And it's just been the same story repeating over and over. And
in a lot of the biblical stories, it's usually the first son is supposed to be king, and then it's usually the second son that ends up as king because something happens to the first one. And it kind of plays out the whole Sumerian mythology also.
Exactly. And I heard one of your guests, or you were talking about the people living nowadays, if they were clones. Well, they don't really have to be clones. They are just their descendants. They're their descendants, because they were here. They were, like I said, mixing with so many people. I mean, it's ridiculous with the amount of people that they were. For example, just to give you a little example, and I have this on my playlist saved in my YouTube channel under History by Others. There's a documentary about Angkor Wat, a living God. And I also give examples of rulers that said, I am God, I am the living God. And so they consider themselves gods. And it's very simple. They just said, I am God. And God just comes from the word Zeus, Dios, Deus Pater, that God turned into God. But if you speak Spanish or Italian or Latin, Deus, Dios, Zeus, that's much more close to the word God in English. But in 1700s AD, this guy, who was of the bloodlines, of course, was in Angkor Wat. He was ruling, and guess what? He was allowed to have sex with all the women in the city. They were all like his. So imagine how many children he had if he was doing this, if that was his way. Just one example. It's just one example. So there's a lot of people that came to be from those lines, and then they were killing each other as well, because then they would say, no, I am the one, I want to rule. And that's what happened all the time during, probably up to now. So these people are still alive. This I don't know if the full-blown like the original bloodlines could be. Why not? I mean, if they keep having children, think about it. Why would they die out? It doesn't make any sense. They maybe shrunk. We're all shorter. I mean, look at the Queen of England. She's tiny, and she's of the bloodline. She's not a giant. She doesn't have to be, because the conditions on the planet are really, really tough. They're really tough on our bodies. That's why we always, get sick, and besides all the crap that they throw at us. But so all the powerful people, all the famous people are of the bloodlines, and all the politicians. Every single one of them. They wouldn't be allowed to be there. And they hate each other and they fight. So you have to believe that's true. Because some people say it's not a show. It's not a show.
Yeah.
They fight, they have fought, they have killed each other. And we're just in the middle. We're the pawns in the middle.
Yeah. We were talking about these Caucasians with blue eyes, green eyes, red hair, blonde hair. Where do you think they came from? If the blue eyes came in around 5 to 10,000 BC, where would they have came from?
Well, there is circumstantial evidence, of course. We can never go and say for sure where from. So there are different groups of people around the world tell you different stories. Some of them say they came from Orion, right? The Dogon tell you that they came from, I can't remember. You'll remember.
B.
Yes, exactly. The Mayans say that their ancestors, which means I'm talking about the high priest. So they're not the regular people, they're the high priest. They call them their grandparents, but it's these people. They came from the Pleiades. The Pleiades. Now, sometimes I was thinking, are they talking about that they came from the people that were represented by these? Because that's what they used to do. They used to put all their names on the stars and the planets, the constellations, when they were living, And when they died, they became to represent the immortal planets and the constellations. That's what they told people. So
like Mount Olympus.
Yeah, for a while I thought, well, maybe they're referring to the people. So they're descendants from the humanoid type of the Rh negative, blue-eyed, blonde people. So, but then this is the interesting thing. The interesting thing is that when the Spaniards went to, for example, Mexico, when they arrived, the people there asked them if they had come down from the sky. Now, why would they say, did you come down from heaven or from the sky? They didn't say you came across the ocean. They said, are you the gods that come down from the sky? So then that makes you wonder. And the other thing that I think is the circumstantial evidence is the blue eyes appearing suddenly, all the written text suddenly appearing. There's no written text before this time. There isn't. It all starts around 6,000 years ago. That's what we can find. There isn't anything before. Now, it doesn't mean that they were not here before. Maybe they were here before, but there were so many catastrophes that probably everything got destroyed. The earth would turn upside down. Mountains would form just overnight. So imagine all the stuff that got destroyed and obliterated, and it ended up under the ocean or with the floods. It's underwater. So what we can see is not very old just because of the cataclysmic events and how, just look at a flood, just look at a little flood, what it does, the destruction that it does nowadays. So imagine this in a bigger scale. It just obliterates everything. And that's why Göbekli Tepe is buried, and the Sphinx in Egypt, the pyramids are buried, and Mesopotamia got buried. And it's because the water has a tremendous power, and the earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, volcanoes coming up, moving the ground, sinking, all the stuff was changing. The whole face of the earth was changing so fast. So when people say, oh, this is hundreds of million years old, it just couldn't be if you know the catastrophes and if you read the records and what people tell you, what happened, what they saw changing in their lifetime, how much things change. So that's what I can see from the text. And I don't know, did I answer your question about the So I think they probably came from somewhere. Now, Velikovsky, this is really cool.
Saturn reigns, please, the red rain.
Talks about the Elohim, and a lot of people get mad because they think that when you say this, you're saying that they're satanic, and not at all. People don't know what's going on. This is only the people at the top. And he says El means Saturn. So Elohim, and he says probably means that they came from Saturn. Now, they were not living in Saturn, but they were probably orbiting Saturn. And so people talk about Ganymede being just like Earth, very, very close. And all those little moons, actually, they're kind of big, some of them, they all have water and they all have life. Even scientists are acknowledging that they have oceans that are not frozen below this layer of ice, and there's life in there.
They've been talking about getting the water off of one of these moons, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like NASA was saying something about that recently. Yes, they are. Yeah, they're talking about all this stuff being and all the planets now, and they little by little are kind of telling you things. But so it's really interesting that Velikovsky mentioned that about Saturn, and he knew a lot of the rabbinical sources because his father was a rabbi, so he got access to all of those good texts that no one is allowed to read except the rabbis. And so that should tell you something. Yeah.
You said that maybe they didn't actually come from these planetary systems, but they were represented by it. Where's the Pleiades at in the sky? Is it in the northern sky?
That would be in the north, I guess. In the north, the north, like towards the sun, towards the head of the sun. So you have the tail of the sun, and then the gas giants are back there, and the southern hemisphere the southern hemisphere of Earth is pointing more towards the tail of the sun, and that's why you can see all these comets coming in from the southern hemisphere. And from the northern part, the sun has an orbit around the Alcyon star, which is called the Great Central Sun, or the Central Sun. And then the Pleiades. So we are part of the Pleiades. We are part of the Seven Sisters. So we belong to a bigger solar system that is the Pleiades. And that's why the Mayans also, and many other cultures, talk about the Pleiades as being really important to them. They were very, very important. So that's probably why. And so some people say Sirius. Sirius would be the dog star because it follows the sun or the solar system. So it's behind in this plasma filament. So imagine we're kind of in a vortex movement. Everything is like a vortex, like a cone. And the galaxy is moving as well, just like the sun, like a vortex tails. We are in the tails of the galaxy, in the galactic arms. And we are moving towards the center, or around behind the great central star, which the Mayans call Hunab-Ku. That's what they said. And they said when the star...
Can we dig into that a little bit too? A little bit more onto that tale of that interesting name. The Mayan story on that would be awesome.
Yes. Well, Hunab-Ku was a place where the God, or this consciousness type of energy, what you would call God, I guess, was residing, and it would emit kind of flares. It would also flare, and they would say it was waves of electricity or energy that would, of course, move through all the tails, which are all connected, plasma filaments, and reach all the stars and all the planets. And they would say that would cause change, and it would just remake and change all of the stars and the planets, including Earth.
Wow.
Is that like the center of the universe? Because it sounds like Kolob.
No, that would be the center of our galaxy, the galactic core.
Yeah, that's what Kolob is, right?
Probably. Maybe. I don't know. I haven't really looked at that name. But sounds like Mormons.
I think that comes from the Mormons.
Yes. Yeah. That's probably what it is. And I mean, this knowledge.
So is that the same as the Mayan one then, or is it different?
Well, I imagine that it would be the same if they're talking about this this energy, because all of this information is from the same people, with a little different, different, and all the spells, and all of this kind of magic. Magic was science, but all the spells come from the line of Ea, Enki, and the dragon lineage. So they're the specialist in that kind of thing.
I was getting some visualizations when you were talking about the energy flowing through, and thinking about a time when Earth's atmosphere itself might have been bigger, and there was more energy during the golden age period. And we have these sacred sites around the Earth, scattered throughout, that are on these dragon lines or ley lines that have been noted to the veins of the Earth, things like that. And then, these sacred sites being on them, places with more electromagnetic power or frequency or radiation, whatever you want to call it. And I was just kind of thinking if, there was a cult of following the God, and the God being this higher plasma energy, to follow the plasma. If there was a time when there was these storms happening through these different cosmological changes, and then because you hear a lot of these old stories in the Saturnian cosmological mythos, and it's a lot more comets, a lot more lightning, and a lot more just abrupt changes happening, because everything was just kind of I guess, I don't really know if it was just a younger galaxy that's just forming to be in its next stage or what have you, but the existers living on Earth experiencing these cosmological changes. I'm wondering if they were like following around this plasma energy around the Earth to these sacred sites, because you see these things, some people call them markers, marking these electromagnetic hotspots, putting up an obelisk or building a tower or a structure to mark it. And I'm like, well, this connection to talk to God happens at this higher vibratorial rate, so I think that ties back. I don't know what the big question here is, but actually I do got one. Here's it. In one of your videos, one of your awesome, amazing videos that you have plenty of on your YouTube channel, you said something about the obelisk being used as tools for resonance and sound frequency. And I was wondering if you wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Actually, the obelisks, as far as I know, were used to measure the movement of the stars, the planets, and the moon, maybe. So they were used as calendars, and mostly. But of course, they're high. So when they're high, their towers, the very high towers, were always used as observation, including the Tower of Babel. It was an observatory.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was. And it was built by Terah, the father of Abraham, to observe Jupiter, for example. So people don't know that. But so that was one of the uses of that. Now, a lot of the tall buildings, like all the towers in Europe and Florence and all these towers that you see, they're just very, very tall. They were, again, used for to survive floods, if they had to, but they were also the best observatories. And the pyramids were used to harness power, like you were saying, and the water. Sometimes you can build a pyramid and it actually will attract water to it. Some people have built pyramids to pull water into them because of the shape. So there is this resonance, and then this special, I guess, biogeometry, you can call it biogeometry, that yes, attracts electricity, and water is a conductor of electricity. So that's why all the pyramids have water underground, but you can also attract it to it. So I guess that could be one of the things you're talking about, that you saw. I can't recall exactly right now about this like obelisks being used for that precise reason. But they were always like telling you the stories, everything that you see carved. Unfortunately, no one ever tells you what it says, but just like all the stone carvings all around the world, and the maps and everything, they all have a story that explains what is going on. What is it they're telling you? They tell you the story of either a catastrophe or linked to a ruler, and catastrophes were so important, they had to write them down because things were changing so fast and people needed to survive. So if you didn't survive, nothing else is important. What else does it matter if you can't survive? So survival was the biggest preoccupation, and what these people spend most of their time trying to do, either writing the stories also for their genealogy, so they could prove that they were descendants from these people, so they could keep ruling in the future, or where they came from and all of that, and how to prove it, or also to preserve the stories of the cataclysmic events, and to be able to tell in the future what it would look like, so to know the signs, and also to have, of course, the records of what happened, so they would know. And just because they wanted to know, you would want to know your history, right? And it's really helpful if you know what to look for. You can extrapolate what would happen. And they had also the scientific knowledge. I think the me's that you were asking about, what the me's were, they were all the scientific knowledge. Just imagine, it's like us. It's like now. So what is the most important to people in power? Science and all the technology. Because if they have the science and the technology, they can control everyone. So it's the same thing before. And the knowledge, they don't tell us anything about what happened in history. and what is to come, because now we don't believe the way we believed before, so we're a little bit more advanced in a way, kind of. We are very deceived, but we are more advanced. So they have to do it differently. They don't use the same tricks that way. But still, we're never told anything real about science, because then people will not buy their, the control mechanisms, which is what they're, and I don't have to mention it, but you know what they're using now. Fear and fear. Fear of this and fear of that, and the storms, and, what's going to change. I'm going to die. If you don't do this, you have to do that. So then we're going to have to take control and tell you what to do, because we need to survive. So that's why they're doing it right now. And and I was just going to go back very quickly to your question, where these people might have come from. Well, there are theories that they came from probably Mars, because Marduk and Semhasai and the Gigis, it's very, very clear that they came down and they arrived in Mount Hermon and in Baalbek. It just tells you it's very close to the same place. It's not exactly the same spot, but it could be talking about the same place. They tell you that they landed there. So landing, where are they going to land from if it's up in a mountain? They have to have come from somewhere else. And then there's this story, and maybe telltale signs that there were some amazing pyramids and other buildings in Mars which had an atmosphere and water until very recently, maybe 3,000 years ago, as just recent as 3,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. And there's that story of Enoch talking about the Gigis coming, or actually the fallen angels. Enoch talks about the fallen angels, and they were around 200. They even give you a number, 200 or 300. So it's possible that maybe they brought a race of people from there, and maybe that's the B or the A blood types. I don't know, could be. Or maybe it's just the O again, O negative, and then they mixed with they brought people from somewhere else also, humans from somewhere else. However they could travel, I don't know exactly what kind of technologies, but they use a lot of stone and natural technologies, and they did use metals and gold. Yeah, gold.
So what about Atlantis then?
Well, Atlantis actually also didn't sink so long ago, like 12,000 years. Always, they like to say 12,000 years, everyone, because they tell you that there was a landmass of ice, or yes, the ice sheet was just growing down from the poles, and it came down as far as where they tell us that the ice was, and then it melted. But they had to tell us that story because they can't tell us that ice sheets just started being formed as recently as 6,000 years ago, because inside of the red dwarf plasma sheath, ice cannot form. And this is told by scientists also, people that study brown dwarfs, the physicists, astrophysicists, they tell you that just couldn't happen. So they're very recent, number one, and they actually have moved. There has not been a one giant piece of ice like they're telling us. It is just the depending on how the Earth axis has been moving, because it's moving, it has moved many, many times. In the Dendera zodiac, there's they're telling you there basically that calendar or zodiac tells you that the Earth passed through Cancer and Leo back and forth during the time of Thoth or Hermes. Sorry, during the time of Horus. No. During the time of Horus, there was a time of Cancer. So they could see the Cancer constellation during the time of Horus. But then during the time of Thoth, which was just a little bit, before, there was 5 actual tilts or geographic pole shifts where, because Earth was moving like a comet, that would make sense, where the sun rose from the east to west, back and forth, east and west, 5 times, entering the age of Leo, going back and forth from Leo to Cancer, back to Leo, back to Cancer. So, and then it went back to Leo. And you were like, well, what? How is that possible? Well, it would be because Earth was just being like thrown all over the place and interacting with all these planets. So it was moving like a lot. It was just very crazy, totally insane. And
Like a top.
yes, basically.
Like a Merkaba.
Yeah, it was like probably, wow.
You know who loves ice? Flat earthers.
Oh boy, yes, probably. Well, that's
They love it. They're like, we're definitely surrounded by ice.
yeah.
and we
Don't even get me
puddles."
started. Well, I found this article. It's really good from the Convergence place, and they tell you it's all a CIA concocted thing, of course, and just to discredit everything. And it is discrediting everything. Just to discredit anything that doesn't fit the status quo, just throw it into the bag of crazies, and that's why it was created, basically, sadly. But and they have a lot of money behind it. That's why people are like so impressed by all the the videos and all this amazing stuff and all the information. And yeah, but anyways, that's a very sad
Feds.
story.
Wow.
It's very sad. But anything to just keep us really confused, very confused, and going down the wrong rabbit holes, and then fighting amongst each other, and people saying you're an idiot because you believe in that, and then the other saying no, you're an idiot because you don't. And then we just get stuck fighting about stupid things that are not even important. That's my what I see happening, and it happens in every single subject that we touch upon. It's like divide the people, just keep them fighting amongst themselves. Don't let them pay attention to what's causing the real problems, like maybe the whole system around the planet.
So do you think Atlantis was a place, though?
Oh, yes, Atlantis, definitely. Atlantis sank. Well, it was part of Egypt. Definitely. Yeah, it was including Egypt. Diodorus Siculus talks about Atlantis. Besides, I have all this in my book. You might want to read that part because it's really very cool, and it has so much description. So I talk about Plato. I include Plato's description of Atlantis, and then Diodorus. But Diodorus is like 10 times more detail and much more interesting than the Plato story. Plato's was much shorter and much smaller. It's very important too. But basically, Diodorus tells you that, or what I have found, and you have to look again at the symbols. Who were the gods ruling and going? The time of Plato tells you that Timaeus was a god, not a god, was a ruler, and King Dardanus was a king ruling during the time of the sinking of Atlantis. So you can go and look at Dardanus and follow his genealogical tree and realize that Dardanus lived around 1500 BC, because his son, or even later than that, maybe 1200 BC, because his son Troias founded Troy, and Troy is not very old. So they left the Black Sea. They were somewhere in the Black Sea, across the Dardanelles Straits, and that's when the ocean got filled up in the Black Sea. It was much lower, and a Bronze Age settlement was right there, filled up in that ocean. They found it in the Black Sea. And then there's a whole documentary. I made a video about it too. It's very cool, where the scientists are studying, and the Russian scientists are telling you all these. And basically they acknowledge that the scientists know that Atlantis and the last ice age was around 3,000 years ago or 3,500 years ago. But they keep repeating, or we hear 12,000 and 12,000. That's all we hear. So there could have been all these big animals, like basically the Ice Age animals, because they found mammoth bones being used by these people at the bottom of the ocean in the Black Sea. And they were using them for tools. So that means that the mammoths were alive. They were alive at that time. So at the end of the Bronze Age. When did the Bronze Age end? Around 1500 BC or 1000 BC or somewhere 1200 BC. That's really recent. And Atlantis it had a main hub, and it was King Atlas. And Atlas was a descendant of probably Ea, or he calls it Ouranos, Diodorus. He gives them different names. And he talked to the high priest of the Greeks, and that's the stories that they gave him. So he wrote them down in 60 BC, and he has a lot of good information. And some things are changed because during the time of the reign of the new kings, they would change the stories, just like Marduk changed the story of the Enuma Elish, which is the story of creation. He put himself in there as a creator god instead of Elil and Ninurta and Anu. He just like erased them, or the Hittite gods. He just erased them and he put himself in there. So that would happen, and you just have to know that. You have to be aware of that, and just have to try to put all the links together and the dots together and weed out the stuff where they're changing themselves, or be aware that some people are changing themselves, like Marduk, especially Marduk. He messed up all the stories, made it much more difficult to know who is who, because they use the name Jupiter Ammon, for example, and the rams. He had the rams' horns. But Atlantis was part of the straits of, Rhodes and that area of the Mediterranean. And there was an island that sunk, but also all of the coastlines were flooded. And in India, the city of Dwarka, of Krishna, was part of Atlantis, because they were the bloodlines of the dragon lineage. And that was, they tell you they found it, the scientists found it in India, and it's right off the coastline, and it was a city of Krishna. And the Kali Yuga began in 1500 BC, so that was also part of Atlantis. So Atlantis sank very recently, but it's very confusing because they always tell us the wrong dating, and everyone else in the alternative media repeats this 12,000 years because they don't know any different, and they don't know the chronologies, and they don't know all this other information. So it's kind of easy just to say 12,000 years ago, and everybody keeps repeating that. But it could have sunk as late as 3,500 years ago, and it also sank in stages, because Atlantis, imagine all the Baalbek and the pyramids being part of that technology. So that was kind of the architecture and technology that you could see. So that's basically what it is. What we see above water and sometimes underwater, the photos of like the place in Japan.
Yonaguni.
Yes, Yanaguni, and all the sunken in the Azores. There's some sunken pyramids off of the coast of Florida. They have those pyramids right there, and all
Bimini Road.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Off the coast of California, close to you guys, not too far. They have also a lot of interesting stuff right there. So the coastlines were part of Atlantis, because he was given the oceans, the islands, and the coastlines. That was kind of his territory, not inland and not high up in the mountains like Baalbek and other places. But it also reached China and all the place I was talking about, Malaysia.
So it's basically like, you think that Atlantis was like all the island chains that were around in the ocean?
And the coastlines. Yes, and the coastlines. So all of these beautiful temples in Thailand, and you could see the symbols of dragons, right? So wherever you see symbols of dragons, the Buddhist, and that was part of Atlantis, because that was kind of like they had kind of divided the world into groups, and they had their colonies, so they would go around. They just like the empires. Think of the British Empire, same thing. So you could say they had the main island, which is England, and then they had their empires in Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, Canada, or United States. So think of it the same way. It's like it's all extrapolates to the way we do things now.
Yeah, we have Catalina Island out here, and it's said that there used to be giants there on Catalina Island.
Yes, definitely. Yes, the Vieira brothers, you probably know about them. They talk about this, and the giants were mostly in pyramids and mounds, found in mounds, and that was the royalty. And they survived as late, well, they were giants, as late as the 1500s, or when the time of the Spaniards. They also recorded when they were going around the Tierra del Fuego, which is Chile,
Antarctica.
Patagonia. There were a lot of giants there, and funny enough, there's still a lot of people there that have the 6 rows of teeth and the 6 fingers and 2 rows of teeth. They still have that gene in there. So that's something. It's very, 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 very interesting.
Yeah. I had something in my head. I forgot
the giants off of the California thing. And we were just in San Francisco doing a meetup and a tour over there, and I don't know. I'm pretty sure that California has been, part of the deluge stories. California has been moving a lot. I think it has a way deeper history, and I think it was an island at one point for sure. And I definitely think there was giants here because the mountains here look a lot like pyramids. Honestly, I'm going to be 100% honest. I'm going to go that route. I'm going to say it that there's so many fucking beautiful mountains here that are just covered in foliage, and they're just perfect pyramid conical shape. And we know it's hard to find the story of mounds in California because there's not that many. You have the Ohlone or Ohlone, it's Oholone, I believe, and they built these big shell mounds, and then that's what entire town of San Francisco was built on top of these shell mounds and sand. And so it was a sand coast, and then the Freemasons have been building on the California coast for a long time. Like, it's just riddled with a bunch of signs on these little towns. And you got the San Francisco Giants, right? Where does that name come from? Super famous sports team. And then the stories with Mount Shasta, being the Lemurian home base. There's like so much of that folklore. But Dan, did you find your question that you were?
I did remember, yeah.
All right, you go, because I was going to side rail completely and go into some other shapeshifter situations, but please continue.
Okay. I was going to bring up like the mounds and stuff because it was like the Norse people that built the mounds and the Irish and stuff, yeah.
Yes, well, it was Hermes or Thoth. He went around the world and he was teaching them. But yes, they are their bloodlines, definitely the Vikings, and I mean, yes, the 13 tribes or 12 tribes, whatever. You can also follow the way they the migrations in my book. I talk about that too. I talk about studies of the different DNA and how they moved around. So you're going to really like that part. I talk about all of that.
Yeah.
I put together things that I found from other people and just put it all in there together. And Velikovsky talked about that as well. He was really into that. But yes, there's other people that talk about these, like Lawrence Gardner. And there's a website called the HebrewNations.com. And they tell you a lot about where the tribes went since Abraham. They don't go further, but they don't talk about the Anunnaki or the Sumerians. They don't talk about that, but they talk about since the time of Abraham and forward. So there's a lot of details and who is their enemies and their plans to rule and
the like Hebrew Nations is that like the Hebrew Israelites webpage?
It's called HebrewNations.com. It's like a rabbi talking about it, but it's just like all in the open. All this really interesting information that it's pretty recent because sometimes you need and I try to read everything I can and I try to be open. I don't do he's this or that, so I'm not going to listen to these people. No, because you have to listen to everyone because they are proud of their background and they just want to tell you. They don't want to hide it. So it's really fascinating. And then you have to, of course, just throw out the stupid shit, the garbage. Just to throw that out. Like when you read the Legends of the Jews, there's a ton of guilt tripping, and you just like say no, thank you, no, thank you. But then there's all this stuff that they're telling you about what was happening, and all the mutations and the giants and the children of Cain with Lilith and the demons. And demons actually means God. That's what it means, or like a ruler, so the word demon wasn't bad. Yeah, it wasn't bad. It was just means lesser God.
Daemon.
It became to be something bad, like evil, but it didn't mean that at all. And the mounts, what I know. Yeah, well, they had the pyramids, including the terraforming pyramids like the Bosnia pyramids, which is what Naomi was talking about. And I believe definitely that they're everywhere around the world, because that's what they were doing. And they just loved they were awesome, and they used them for different purposes. And always they had their bunkers. They were bunkers. Mounds were bunkers.
Oh, they're bunkers. That's what I was going to ask, is what was the difference between like the mounds and the pyramids? Why the different type of thing, if they're both built by Hermes or by Thoth, because Thoth also built the pyramids because he's the one that wrote the Hermetic laws.
Yes.
The Atlantean.
Yes, well, he had he had the know-how, right? So he was the one teaching, and they didn't want this being taught to everyone except for the fallen angels. That's why the fallen angels were so chastised and so hated, because they were teaching the humans all this technology that they were not supposed to, because then they couldn't be controlled. They were just doing their own thing and saying, screw you, we're just going to do our thing and we don't need you. So that's why they were so hated that's why they were the fallen angels, and all of these, and the evil, or Satan, and all this stuff. It was all about control. But the mounds I think that they had different purpose. When you couldn't build a pyramid, you didn't have the technology or the time. Imagine if there's a catastrophe coming and you just need to do it quick. A pyramid would take for way more time than to build a mound. And mounds, you probably know this, but they're filled with underground chambers, like little cities. So,
like anthills.
Yeah. And then they have all their symbols is always of the plasma formations of these super beautiful, like spiraling shapes, all usually 3 that they could see in the tails of planets and comets, which are the same thing basically, just discharging or not.
What about this? You said earlier, like, a sickness coming on the tails of comets. And what have you found in your research about bacteria traveling on these things? And what has mainstream science found and maybe talked about what comes on comets? I have no idea, but that is fascinating.
Yes, well, because comets are not made out of ice, and they're not just melting, they actually are attracting their hot rocky bodies. And I have a video that I just made where I show you their own papers and their own data telling you they're just hot, electromagnetically charged bodies, just like a planet or a moon. And sometimes they even said, Ceres, or an asteroid. It's just the same thing. It's just depending if they are discharging or not the electrical currents of other planets or the sun that changed voltage, and then they look like comets, which are these tails of plasma. So they are capturing everything they are encountering. So they capture, if they go by Jupiter, they capture all these red elements. They capture their field also, like they have burnt hydrocarbons on them. They have tar, oil on the comet, on the body of the comet. And they have tar and oil in their tails. They can also transmute elements because of the electricity that I was mentioning, the Ebner effect. Electricity transmutes. So if their tails are capturing things, and imagine they have also hydrogen, and they have all kinds of minerals, all kinds of elements. They have gold, they have precious metals, they have stones, beautiful precious stones, everything that you can think of. it's in the tails of comets and meteorites. That's why sometimes they're so, important, and they're so amazing, and they have radiation too. They have radiation because the comets are just carrying all these cosmic rays. Well, they're interacting with Earth. They have all these cosmic rays that can hurt a lot and again cause
Oh, you cut out there.
I cut out?
Yeah, I cut out at the end, but it's okay because I have another question. So, in the Saturnian cosmology or the electric universe model, the split from the golden age to what we are experiencing now is this new sun, and these new solar rays and the light changing and everything. I was wondering more about like the Middle Ages and the Gothic period, and what was happening, if you know what was happening then cosmologically, and if that could be explained, if you've looked at that part of history and what kind of crazy things were going on, because there seemed to be a refinement of culture and like a syncretic stealing of culture from the ancient world there, and highly suppressed as the funneling of the bloodlines continued. But I was also wondering what type of cosmological plays had on the Middle Ages of history.
Yes. Well, just to finish, bacteria. There's bacteria and living organisms definitely in the tails of comets. And then changing to this other question. Well, the catastrophes have not stopped. They have continued. And it's probably, well, there's different reasons. There's a sort of cycle that I found, but it doesn't mean that this is the only thing at all. It's just part of it, but it's not the only thing, because there's also things that happen in between these cycles that I call the 575-year cycle between Jupiter, Venus, Earth, and scientists also are acknowledging this, and the ancients are talking about this, including Noah Webster, which, just like Velikovsky, studied the relationship between comets, the electric universe, or the electric solar system, because he did talk about electricity affecting life, disease, catastrophes on Earth, including the moon and all the other planets. And he mentions from the ancient historians and chronologers and chromatographers the approach of, well, he says that we approach Venus and Mars. And what I realize is that we actually move towards Jupiter. And I follow the history. If you follow history, you realize that people throughout the time, the ages, let's say just the last 2,000 years, which will pass by the Middle Ages, they were still worshiping Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. And you would say, well, why? Is it because they are just descendants from these people? Like some of them say, yes, I'm descendant from this person, like so many people were still saying, including in 1690 AD, it was the King Louis the 16th of France. He said, I am Jupiter and I am the sun. But also Queen Elizabeth said, I am the sun and I control the weather. She was saying that, and she had a dress with eyes and ears in her dress. I hear everything and I see everything. So this creepy surveillance state of things is not new. It's not new. It's like the all-seeing eye. It's the all-seeing eye. So they would tell people, I see you and I hear you, and because I am the rays of the sun, and the rays of the sun have eyes and ears. So be careful what you say and what you think. And in the Middle Ages, well, I mean, it's just ridiculous. Sometimes I'm like, seriously, when I read history, it just doesn't stop. And I'm thinking, humans have had such a hard time. We just have such a freaking hard time. We've been lucky. And of course, now we're not lucky, because mankind is bringing a lot of suffering besides what maybe nature could do. But I think that maybe they're doing this because they know something is going to happen and they want to get rid of a bunch of people that could cause a lot of problems for them. And there might be a time coming that there's going to be more droughts. I mean, there are already droughts. More droughts.
I think we're heading into an ice age.
Yes, just that. You know what? I'm going to have a no, I don't. But actually, if there's a big volcanic eruption, like a really, really big one, that could just, like it happened in 1814, the Tambora, or 1815, just an explosion that is not that big can cause a lot of problems because it just covers the sunlight, and then the crops fail. And if the crops fail and there's just unseasonable weather, your crop gets ruined, and then what do? You don't have a crop. So it doesn't take a lot of bad stuff to ruin life for mankind, and that's why these people always had they were preppers. The
seed
bloodlines
banks
always
in the sides of mountains in the Netherlands, and buying all the farmland and then testing out, trying to grow plants with less sunlight and trying to genetically modify plants that will do better under no sunlight. Those are all things that Sir Bill Gates has done within the past decade. just to talk about prepping.
Yes. I think seriously that because they can't tell us exactly what is going on, they're just trying to do this other crazy thing, and they are trying to figure out ways to keep the population alive. Like you're saying, it sounds horrible, but during times of famine, people ate locusts, which are crickets, and honey. That's what the people would eat, and it's disgusting. I mean, some people in Mexico, they eat crickets. I mean, the natives eat crickets and worms. They fry worms. I mean, it's gross, but so many other cultures do, and they just don't wink an eye. They think it's okay. We think it's gross, and I really don't want to eat insects. But maybe they know this is coming, so they're prepping people, and they probably want to try two techniques. One, let's just depopulate people. Let's just try to prevent them from having children, which also happens when there's a lot of catastrophes. People stop having children. That's what happens because your body cannot do both. I mean, the body is just trying to survive, so it's obvious that you're not going to be having children. It's not a good time. And then the other thing that could happen is that they're trying to get rid of people, which they can't because the human body, it's just amazing. All of nature kind of deals with what it's being thrown at, and it kind of fixes itself, or it survives. Maybe we're not thriving, but we're surviving, and we feel like shit. We feel like headaches, and we're dizzy because of all the EMF, or the bad food, or the pollution, or the toxicity that we have to deal with. But we're alive. We don't die. So I think they're just trying different ways. Like, okay, let's try to convince them. Let's try to see if they take these. Let's try to see if we can modify them so they can have children. So they're trying to lower the population, and and of course they're trying to control people, like see how much they can control, and animals and plants, so we are obedient, or maybe we're not so dangerous during this, and maybe until their technology lasts, and maybe on the other side they will know, oh, we can do this, we can just, let's set it up again, even if their technology, if their like the power grid and the satellites get destroyed. Well, they know at least that they can do this again, because the control has always been one of their priorities, to manipulate and control. And they fight for control. They fight for, James Corbett. I love what he says about this. He says, they are fighting for the space between your ears. That's what they want. They fight for that. So the both sides, or three sides, or however many sides there are, they're fighting for that for your brain, so they can control you. And it's true. And you just have to watch the news. It's like a clown show. It's like Clown Town. It's like
knowledge is power. You talk about Marduk and how you kind of do like an astrotheology about Marduk and how that relates to the cosmos and the electric universe. Can you get into that?
Well, of course. Well, Marduk is the firstborn son of Ea or Enki. And he was very upset because, well, his father was very upset because he thought he was going to be the one to rule Earth, like the top dog. And the power went to his brother Elil, and that was after the deluge. So when the time of the entering of the age of Taurus, and I was going to mention this, Atlantis also sank in the age of Aries. That's when Marduk took over, speaking of Marduk. So they blame Marduk for causing this, which is what the Enuma talks about. Marduk, which is Jupiter, or Nibiru before. He was Nibiru, which means planet of crossing. So it's many planets that cross the path of Earth because Earth was a freaking comet. So of course it encountered all kinds of things. Besides the big planets, it encountered a ton of moons. And you can see these stories in the War of the Titans. It's
how would they
detailed.
travel back and forth? Do you have a theory on that?
How they move between planets?
Yeah, because I always have heard the Mars being like coming back and forth, or maybe Earth was going back and forth to Mars. But in the Velikovsky Saturnian, when they were all in a line, like the planets were lined up, and then Mars would kind of be this satellite planet that would come back and forth. Yeah, or portal or something you could get to the axis of the north.
We're going to have to, I never found a polar configuration per se, but it doesn't matter because it's not necessary. It's not needed. There was all these catastrophes. So what he was trying to explain is that they were like a comet. So Saturn was pulling the other planetary bodies like a comet, which could have been for a little while, but it's not really found exactly explained like that. It's more explained like castration. So
cat.
Yeah, castration. Like that's how they love to talk about sex. Well, these people
gotta get your catheter, dude.
They're obsessed. They're just a little obsessed with sex. Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, look at all the mythologies. They're always naked, and everything is like, or the Hittite story. I mean, that's the Hittite story, right? The Kumar ate it's really like he bit off the private parts of the other guy that he was fighting, but they're talking about the planets and the people fighting. Like they were real people, but then they talk about like these crazy stories because of what people are seeing in the sky. But it's the same thing as the story of the Greeks of castration from or dethronement of Uranus by his son Cronus, and then the same thing happened to Cronus by his son Jupiter. But what that means is that the sickle means like a plasma discharge that people could see. It was like a sickle, and that sickle, actually the castration was the capture. It took away the planets, and eating the planets doesn't mean, or the children, it doesn't mean that Cronus ate his children, like ate them physically. No, he actually covered them with his plasma and his electric filaments and his CMEs. It was like coronal mass ejections, and they have water. It had a lot of water, and all these rings that it ejected was water and all these elements, because stars produce elements in their atmosphere. It's called the Marklund convection. They create elements, just like Earth creates some of the elements from within, and the volcanoes just eject all this new life and new elements, right? It creates crustal and life. The ashes always creates the best food. It's so filled with nutrients. So, Marduk would be Jupiter. He would be the equivalent of Jupiter. But remember, he took over. So that it doesn't matter. The important thing is that there was the planets. The castration meant that one castrated the planets from or capture the planets from the other because of the electrical interactions, went nova, and the planets were moving because the energy or the current the strongest current, so there was more electromagnetism pulling it was towards Jupiter and the sun, just because the sun was stronger, it had a higher voltage. And the Birkeland currents, you probably know about this, they're like concentric circles of different voltages and different intensities of each current. They counter rotate. That's where the planets are traveling along. That's the orbits, what we call the orbits. And they are behind, so spiraling behind the star, the sun. So we were going through one being temporarily just like these big stars, like, well, not stars, I'll call them stars, but they're unlit stars. The Jupiter and Neptune and Saturn, they're still capturing moons all the time. That means just like Earth. Imagine Earth, that it was different because before we came all in together, so it was like a big mess. It was like the War of the Titans. That's why the War of the Titans was based on. And Marduk was blamed for castrating and creating the flood. Well, he was blamed for making Saturn go nova, and when Saturn went nova, it caused the flood, but it was blamed on Jupiter. Like the Egyptian, going back to the Egyptian, the god Narmer or Menes, after the flood, which was after Horus. So Horus was the last god to rule before the flood. Now there's a little bit of confusion because here there was several floods. There was just not one. So are they talking about the flood of the time of Dardanus, the one that we were talking about, the sinking of Atlantis, or are they talking about the flood of Noah? They don't say. They just tell you there was a flood, and after the flood, Menes or Narmer, that was the first pharaoh, the first human, not god, but human or demigod to rule after the flood. He inscribed in the temple of Jupiter a sort of like a very nasty, some hieroglyphs there saying, it was your fault. You caused the flood and this catastrophe. And so that probably tells you that happened during the time of Jupiter, which is around the time of the Minoans and Santorini exploding, and the Exodus, which was around the 1500s BC. But unfortunately, I don't know, sometimes when I look at religions, I don't know if it's Marduk, the one that we are praying to as the God, our God, like the monotheistic God, Father, Heavenly Father, our Father, Father, and all this, the Christians. It might be Marduk, and sometimes I would think, is it Elil? Is it Marduk? Who are these people? Who are we praying to? And I think it's Marduk.
I'm actually with you on that. So do you think that Sitchin was wrong? Because he says Marduk is Nibiru, so you don't believe that Marduk was Nibiru. You think that he was Jupiter. But didn't Marduk kill Enlil, who was Jupiter, and then take over the title? And that's how
you're right. You're right. Yes. See, it's confusing because of what I was saying, that he kind of supplanted. So there was two stories that you find, and then you're like, okay, yeah, he has usurped the place. He became a dictator, and he's also Atum, by the way, Atum Ra. That's Marduk as well.
Yes.
So, and Ammon, Zeus Ammon. I think that Zeus is Jupiter Ninurta, the son of Elil. And then every time you see Ammon or Amun, Amun Ra, then that's Marduk. And he also called himself the sun. He was like a sun god, but he wasn't, because he was the sun that we are closest to now, which is called Apollo in the Greek text, or Utu in the Sumerian text. That would be our current sun. Marduk was called the sun because Jupiter was like a sun to us, because they were like little suns. They were acting like a sun. They looked like a sun. And even planets like Venus, when it's very close to us, it looks like a little bit like a sun because it's so bright and it's totally like just like glowing. It's glowing with all this plasma, the serpentine plasma. So that's something confusing when people, or confusing for people when they hear the word sun. They think of all of them were this sun, but not. They represented different suns. And Marduk, what he did is he took out the name Nibiru, which meant also Jupiter. So Nibiru, here I can read it to you here because that's maybe quite interesting.
It's the wandering Jupiter.
It was, included Nibiru. I think I spelled it Nibiru. Okay, yeah, I found it. So let's see. Jupiter. Well, he was Nibiru, according to Babylonian astronomy. But Nibiru also represented, Jupiter, Hadad, Adad, Ninurta. So Jupiter was represented by different people, like I said, or rulers. Was son of Elil. So Baal, or with the B-A'-Al, that's Zeus or Adad, of the bloodline of Elil. Asur to the Canaanites, Ilu, Ea, or Yah, Adonai. In Latin, Jupiter is Deus Pater, D-I-I, Div, like divine, Dios, Jovis, Diovis, Diaos in the Indo-European, Yao, like Y-A-O in China. To some, to the ancient Greeks, Dionysius was also. And then Thor of the Norse, Indra of the Hindu. Elil was originally Saturn. And like I said, Marduk, in the later Babylonian version of the Enuma Elish, when he took the role of chief ruler around 1700 BC. Some people say during the time of Hammurabi. So if you look for Hammurabi, that's about the time of Marduk, who gave him the laws of the Babylonians, like the terrible laws that everyone talks about, supplanted Enlil and Ninurta at this time. So he replaced the word Nibiru and put his name Marduk in the text. And he battled Tiamat. And I can talk to you about Tiamat, what I think it is. It's not a different planet than some people think. It was just the monster that people saw, just like Jupiter. It could have been. So at the time of Jupiter events, we interacted not just with Jupiter, but all the moons of Jupiter. Imagine how many moons there were around Jupiter that we had to encounter and just deal with and see in the sky. So it could have been one of these moons that was looking very scary and like a monster. And if you look at Tiamat, I also talk about Tiamat being the mother of Elil. So Marduk, he hated the mother of Elil because that wasn't his grandmother. His grandmother was someone else. And he made to the monster. So he called her the monster. That's her. And that's what these people used to do. They used to blame each other. Like long time ago, they used to do this and say, that's the spirit or the body embodiment of this Tiamat. And I'm going to fight it. So they would pretend to be fighting it. But this is what happened when he says he split Tiamat in two. The text says that it created on earth the Euphrates river and the other river that is next to it, like there's two rivers. So he's not talking about, he's talking about earth. So it's kind of confusing. It's confusing. So you have to think about it that way, because people say, oh, it was a planet that got destroyed and it's the asteroid belt. But I don't see that in the text. It doesn't really explain it as that. It was more plasma discharges that they could see in the sky, and Earth having geological changes and rivers being formed, including the ones in Mesopotamia, because that's what the
So
text.
could it have been like a continent splitting apart from the other piece of it?
Definitely. And Marduk Jupiter became the young Bel, or Belus in Babylon. Also, he became known as Hamon, Amun, Amun-Ra, and Atum-Ra in Egypt. And then he became, I guess, the one that is worshipped by the Christians, unfortunately, because you can see the hats of the popes. They look like the head of a fish, right? Like the Dagon, or this god. All right, so then Nibiru also meant, here I'm just trying to find the text. You can ask me something else in the meantime, or say something while I find it.
Okay. Well, we're about at our 2-hour mark, so we're going to kind of wrap it up.
Wow.
So
I found it. I found it.
Right.
Yeah. As mentioned, Nibiru was used for Jupiter. Talking about Jupiter. Mercury, Ea, Neptune, and Venus, with Earth's magnetic field and when it caused catastrophic disruptions. So it was mentioned in the text as having these places, like, or a reddish star when it was Jupiter. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. I know Roman wanted to ask about the red rain.
Oh, yes. The red rain that they said it was blood. Well, during the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, there were so many terrible cataclysmic events because of these approaches of Venus and Mars that we were doing every 575 years. And 1680 was one of the times that we approached Venus, but also before and after. I think we moved towards all this big area of moons, like we move closer to all this space where it's just, I guess they're everywhere. Comets and moons, unfortunately, they're just flying everywhere around the solar system. And the red rain is the elements that the comets or the planets capture, and they could be iron oxide or sulfur oxide, and they are seen coming down as blood, or it was said that it was blood raining, but it was not blood raining down. It was these elements, and they would make the water toxic. So all the rivers and the oceans, including at the time of the Exodus, you could see the Red Sea, but the ocean turning red, and in Egypt, the water turning red, and all the animals and people that would drink from it would die because it was very toxic.
Damn. Yeah, that's heavy. Is what's the most recent time that's happened? Is that what some forms of acid rain could be here?
That too, but that rain, the red rain, we still see it sometimes around the world. You just don't know if it's like dyes that people throw in the water. We could be seeing a lot more strange things happening. And there's two big planets in the solar system, Bernardinelli Bernstein, that is coming close to Saturn in 2030, but it's already in the solar system, and K2, which is already by Mars, and it's close. Its perihelion is December 19th, 2022. And so I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things happening in the next years or decade for sure. And I made a playlist of the hidden history with catastrophes of the last 2,000 years, and I go into all of the different, like the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the 1800s. I go through the whole 2,000 last years that no one really has talked about, like Velikovsky. Noah Webster did, but a little different. He talked about pandemics and catastrophes, but he didn't talk about the gods and the planets, and he didn't do that part. And yes, during the Middle Ages, that was happening, and the time of the burning of the witches, and every time there was a lot of people dying, and just weird things happening, they would blame their enemies, and they would say it's witchcraft, or just blame their enemies, oh, they're poisoning us. But it was all these encounters with the tails of all these planets and comets, including Noah Webster during 1790s, when he wrote his book. He tells you there that he lived through some interesting phenomena that had to do with Mars approaching Earth much closer than that it had been in, hundreds of years. And it wasn't as bad as the 1600s, but you had the Little Ice Age. And that, hold on. The Little Ice Age was, I think, from 1640 to 1680. There was just really, really, really a hard time. And I'm going to have a presentation, and it's going to be free on YouTube. This is going to be on the channel, The Geometric View, and I will have the link on my channel. So if you put the link to my channel, people can find it, or The Geometric View. Okay. It's a very simple name, in which I go into this if we are heading towards a Little Ice Age. And it's going to be free, and it's going to be, I think, showing at 1:30. It's part of the Electromagnetic Universe World Fair that they're doing in Detroit on the 14th of August, next Saturday. But they have a virtual presentation by many people that can't make it, or
I posted it on our Telegram, and I'll post another link
cool.
Probably tomorrow. Yes, of course.
Yeah, so make sure to check that one. And then I put 2 videos that are related to that just lately, like the newest videos. That's why I uploaded them. So it's related to that. So I go deeper into those subjects, and it could happen anytime. I mean, we are in a very active universe and solar system, and there's just never boring, never a dull moment. And yeah, expect some craziness.
Sweet.
And also, your book is free on your website, right?
Yeah, everything is free. I accept donations. I really appreciate that, or gifts through PayPal, or people can contact me if they want to send it some other way if they don't have PayPal. But yeah, everything is free.
And tell people the name of the YouTube channel. Is that also Mythos Decoded?
No, I changed it to Tess Ancient Worlds and Cosmic Explorer. Yeah, it's a little bit long, but
nice short name.
I'll put the link. Yes, well, you have it, right, Romy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, we'll
Asterix,
put everything.
Ancient World and Explorer.
Yeah, we'll put everything in the show notes, and then they can clicky and go see what's good. And
they can
forward to your presentation this weekend.
Thank you. Yeah, they can search for Tess Clark, Mythos Decoded, and I'm on Odyssey as well, but very few people are on Odyssey.
Excellent.
But yeah, well, thank you guys. It's been fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Thank you so much.
We don't get to talk about the Saturnian cosmos too much, so that this has been great. Plan on diving deep here. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's also our Egypt and Sumerian months, so it kind of fits right into all of that stuff also. So it's perfect.
We'd love to talk to you again if your listeners like it, and we can always talk more, and we can do a video thing if you want. We can do a video.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm sure they will.
Nice.
All right.
Well, thank you very much again, Tess, and every Fire Tribe. Go check her out on Mythos Decoded website, and check her out on YouTube. And if you're not down with that,
wake up.